Ethan had been working at the small repair station on the edge of the galaxy for over a year now. The station was in the middle of nowhere, far from any bustling planets or busy spaceports. It was quiet most of the time, with only a few ships passing by now and then. Ethan, a human mechanic, spent most of his days fixing things: ships, tools, equipment, anything that needed work. He had grown used to the silence and the routine. But today, something was different. It was late in the afternoon when the door to his workshop slid open with a soft hiss. Ethan was wiping his hands on a rag when he looked up. Standing in the doorway was a tall alien woman. She had smooth, shimmering skin that almost glowed, though it looked duller than it should have been. Her long hair, a mix of violet and silver, hung loosely around her face. Her eyes, a brilliant shade of green, stared at him with an intense look. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked, confused. It wasn't every day that someone, especially an alien, came to his workshop. The woman took a few steps inside, hesitating for just a moment before speaking. I need help," she said, her voice soft but urgent. She looked like she had been through a lot. Her clothes were torn, and she was covered in dust and grime. She was clearly not from around here. Ethan stood up, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit, feeling unsure of what to do. What kind of help? The woman's eyes shifted around the room, as though trying to find the right words. Then, with a sigh, she spoke again, more desperately this time. "Please, wash me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Wash you?" he asked, his brows furrowing. "You want a shower or something?" The woman nodded quickly, but then added, "It's not that simple. I need you to wash me properly." Ethan didn't understand. What did she mean by properly? Was she asking for something more than just a regular cleaning? He glanced at her again. The alien's skin, though beautiful, seemed to be in poor condition. It looked rough, almost as if it were drying out, and there were cracks here and there. He could tell she was in discomfort, but what exactly was she asking him to do? "Look," he said, trying to be polite. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I'm a mechanic, not a... Well, I don't know what you need." The woman's eyes softened, and she seemed to shrink a little under his gaze. She sighed, looking down at her hands before meeting his eyes again. "I am HFY," she explained, her voice steady now. "My species, we need a specific kind of care. If our bodies are not properly washed and maintained, we can start to decay." Ethan frowned. "Decay?" She nodded. "Yes, we exude a special fluid that keeps our skin alive and vibrant. But if it is not cleaned regularly, it hardens and causes harm. That's why I need you to help me. Only humans with your unique dexterity can do it properly." Ethan's head was spinning. He had heard of the HFY before, but he had never met one in person. They were a rare species, known for their radiant, almost ethereal appearance. Their beauty was legendary, but Ethan had never realized the kind of care they needed. "But why me?" Ethan asked, still confused. "Why can't someone from your own people help you?" The HFY woman seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering. "I was stranded. My ship broke down, and I've been here for days. No one else is around to help me." She looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed by her situation. Ethan felt a wave of sympathy for her. She was clearly in need, and there didn't seem to be anyone else who could assist her. He glanced at her again, unsure of what to do. He wasn't a doctor or a specialist. He was just a mechanic. But seeing the desperation in her eyes made something inside him click. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'll help you." The woman's face lit up with relief. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me." Ethan smiled awkwardly. "No problem," he said. "Let me just get some things ready." As the HFY woman sat down on a nearby bench, Ethan gathered his supplies. It was strange, but he could feel the weight of her trust on him. She had asked for help, and he was going to do his best to provide it. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. Ethan stood in front of the auxiliary woman, still unsure about what he was about to do. He had helped people fix their ships, repair tools, and even troubleshoot broken equipment, but never had he been asked to care for someone in this way. It wasn't just about a simple cleaning, it was about saving her. He glanced at her again, noticing how her skin shimmered under the dim lights of his workshop. But it wasn't the vibrant glow he had expected. It looked dull and cracked, like an ancient piece of artwork that had seen better days. He quickly turned to gather the necessary items: warm water, cloths, and some basic soaps. The tools felt foreign in his hands, not because he didn't know how to use them, but because he had never prepared for this kind of situation. He was used to fixing machines, not dealing with delicate biological needs. The auxiliary woman, who had introduced herself as Lorani, sat quietly on a stool near the workbench. Her shoulders were slumped, and she seemed almost exhausted. It was clear that whatever was happening to her body was taking a toll. Lorani watched him with an unreadable expression, her eyes a mix of trust and worry. "You've never done this before, have you?" she asked softly. Ethan paused, then shook his head. "No, I haven't," he admitted, "but I'll do my best." Lorani gave him a faint smile. "Thank you. I didn't know who else to turn to." As Ethan filled a basin with warm water, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of life Lorani had led. She was a member of a species that was clearly advanced. Her skin alone showed that. But now, here she was, stranded and vulnerable. He had to admit, there was something fascinating about her. "I've heard of the auxiliary," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "You're known for being one of the most beautiful species in the galaxy, but I didn't know you had such delicate needs." Lorani looked down at her hands, her fingers tapping nervously. "We are unique," she explained. "Our bodies produce a fluid that helps our skin stay healthy and bright. But when we are exposed to harsh conditions, or when we don't receive the care we need, that fluid hardens and our skin becomes brittle. It's a painful process. Some of us die from it." Ethan's heart went out to her. He had heard stories about different alien species and their unique challenges, but this was something entirely new. He now understood why she had asked for his help in such a strange way. The urgency in her voice earlier had been real. He approached her carefully, holding the basin of water. "So this is important for your survival?" he asked, still trying to grasp the full scope of what she was telling him. Lorani nodded. "Yes. Without proper care, I would not last much longer. The fluid needs to be removed and replaced regularly. It's why the auxiliary have attendants, trained individuals who know how to properly clean and restore us. But I have no one here. No one except you." Ethan set the basin down in front of her, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't know much about auxiliary culture, but it was clear that they had a high standard of care. He had seen their kind in images before, tall, elegant beings with perfect, glowing skin. He couldn't help but notice that Lorani's appearance was so much different. She was a far cry from the flawless beauty he had imagined. He dipped a cloth into the warm water, wringing it out gently before moving toward her. "All right, let's get started. Just let me know if I do anything wrong." Lorani gave him a reassuring smile. "I trust you." As Ethan began to carefully wipe away the grime from her skin, he could see the dull patches slowly begin to fade. Lorani's skin started to regain its soft, glowing quality, but it was still far from the radiant beauty she must have once had. It wasn't just the cleaning that made the difference. It was the way her body responded to his touch. It seemed almost alive. The fluid in her skin was being replaced with fresh moisture as he worked, and Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the complexity of her biology. There was something intimate about the process. It wasn't that Ethan was uncomfortable. It was more that he felt the weight of the responsibility. He wasn't just helping her feel better physically. He was giving her a chance to survive. As he continued, Lorani spoke again, this time with a note of sadness in her voice. "I never imagined I would be in a situation like this. stranded, alone. The Xilari are not meant to rely on others like this. Ethan paused for a moment, looking at her. Hey, no one should have to face things like this alone, he said, his voice gentle. You didn't have a choice in what happened. But you have a choice now. And I'm here to help. Lorani's eyes softened, and she seemed to relax a little more. She looked at Ethan with a grateful expression. You are kind, human. I didn't expect kindness from anyone here, but you've given me hope. Ethan continued working, feeling a strange sense of connection to her. He had always known that humans were resourceful, but this was something different. Helping Lorani wasn't just about fixing something. It was about restoring life to someone who needed it. As the process continued, Lorani's skin became more vibrant, the cracks slowly healing. Ethan could see her breathing more easily, and her posture straightened. She looked less like a stranger and more like someone he could trust. By the time he finished, Lorani's body glowed with the same radiance he had heard about. But it wasn't just her skin that had changed. It was her whole demeanor. She was no longer the broken, tired woman who had entered his workshop. Now she was a Xilari once again, full of life and energy. Ethan stepped back and looked at her, surprised by the transformation. I didn't know it could make this much of a difference, he said. Lorani smiled, her eyes shining. You've saved my life, Ethan. Ethan watched as Lorani stood up from the stool, the transformation in her appearance nothing short of remarkable. Her once dull and cracked skin now shimmered with a soft glow, and her tired eyes were brighter, more focused. She looked like a completely different person, almost as if the life had returned to her. It was clear that his help had made a huge difference, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Thank you, Lorani said, her voice filled with gratitude. She stepped closer to Ethan, her movements graceful as she adjusted to her restored energy. I can't believe how much better I feel. I didn't think someone like you could help me in this way. Ethan scratched the back of his neck, still processing everything that had happened. I didn't know I could either, he admitted with a small chuckle. I mean, I'm a mechanic. I'm not a healer or anything. He gave her a lopsided grin. But I'm glad it worked out. Lorani's smile grew wider. It worked more than just fine. You saved me. You gave me a chance to live again. The words hung in the air between them, and Ethan felt a sudden weight in his chest. He hadn't expected to be thanked so deeply, nor had he expected to feel such a strong sense of responsibility. He had only meant to help, to do what was right. But now he realized that what he had done was more than just a simple favor. He had made a real difference. Well, he said after a moment, trying to shake off the intense feeling. I guess I did what anyone would do. Lorani shook her head, her eyes serious now. No, Ethan, not anyone. You saw me, really saw me. You didn't turn away. That's rare. She paused, and for a moment, Ethan could see a shadow cross her face. My people, we've been through a lot. Most don't understand us, don't know what we need. Ethan was quiet, listening closely. I think I understand a little more now, he said thoughtfully. But you're not alone anymore. You don't have to go through this by yourself. Lorani smiled softly, her gaze turning distant for a moment as she seemed to look beyond the walls of the workshop, perhaps lost in her own thoughts. Thank you, Ethan. You don't know how much your kindness means to me. A silence fell between them. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. He had only done what felt right, but hearing how much it had impacted her made him realize just how big of a moment this was for both of them. It wasn't just about fixing a problem or doing a task. It was about helping someone in need, someone who had no other options. After a moment, Lorani spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were asking herself a question. I wonder if the universe ever works in such mysterious ways for a reason, she mused aloud. I came here alone, without hope, and now I have something I never expected. Ethan looked at her, a little confused. What do you mean? Lorani turned to face him, her eyes searching his. I mean that I was sent here for a reason, she said, her voice steady, but filled with a kind of quiet wonder. Not just to survive, but to meet you. Ethan blinked, not entirely sure what to make of her words. To meet me? Lorraine nodded, her expression serious. Yes. I don't know why, but I feel it, deep inside. The universe brings things together for reasons we don't always understand. She paused, then added, I feel connected to you now, in a way I can't explain. Ethan was silent for a long moment, trying to process everything she had said. He had never thought of his life as having some greater purpose, some deep connection with someone he'd just met. But something about Lorraine's words resonated with him. It wasn't just about helping her. There was something else, something unspoken, between them. You don't have to explain it, he said, breaking the silence. I'm just glad I could help. Lorraine nodded, her eyes softening. Thank you, Ethan. More than you know. It was at that moment that Ethan realized just how deep this connection had become, even though they had only just met. There was something undeniable about the bond forming between them, something that went beyond the physical. He didn't know where it would lead or what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. This moment, this encounter, had changed both of their lives. For a long time after, they simply stood there, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. The workshop, once a place of machines and tools, now felt like a space where something much more profound was happening. As the hours passed, Lorraine eventually spoke again, breaking the quiet. I should go now. I need to find a way to get back to my people, but I won't forget this. Ethan nodded, though part of him didn't want her to leave. I'll make sure your ship is ready. I can help you fix it up and get you back on your way. Lorraine smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. I would like that. Thank you, Ethan. I won't forget your kindness. Ever. And with that, the two of them set to work, not just on fixing her ship, but on something far deeper. A connection that neither of them had expected, but one that would change both of their lives forever. Ethan and Lorraine worked together in the workshop for hours. He had helped her repair her ship before, but now it felt different. The work didn't seem as important as the conversation between them, the quiet moments shared in between the clinking of tools and the hum of machinery. Each passing minute felt more and more like they were on the same path, both in their work and in the quiet bond forming between them. Ethan had learned a lot more about Lorraine in the time they spent together. She had told him about her home planet, a world far from Earth, where things were not as peaceful as they once were. Her people, the Exilarians, had been pushed to the edge of survival, and now she was one of the few left. Lorraine worked with a focus that surprised Ethan. She knew her ship better than he could have imagined, even with all his mechanical experience. Her hands, once delicate, moved with purpose as she worked on the ship's engines. Ethan admired her determination. There was strength in her, a quiet power that matched the courage she had shown when she first asked for help. How did you end up here, alone? Ethan asked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Lorraine paused, glancing at him, and then turned her attention back to the ship. It's a long story, she said softly, but my planet was destroyed. Not in the way you would think. The war came to us. The invaders destroyed everything. I fled to escape, hoping to find some peace. I never imagined it would lead me here. Ethan nodded, understanding more than she realized. I'm sorry about your world. Lorraine met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a sadness that was hard to ignore. Thank you. But the worst part isn't the loss. It's that no one helped us. We were alone. No one cared. Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He didn't know what it felt like to lose everything, to have no one to turn to for help. But he could feel the weight of her loss, the isolation she had experienced. He wasn't sure what to say, so he stayed quiet, allowing her to speak if she wanted. Instead, Lorraine shook her head slightly, as if trying to shake off the sadness. But that's in the past now. I have to focus on moving forward, on surviving. She looked back at Ethan, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. And, "I'm not alone anymore." The words were simple, but to Ethan, they meant everything. He had never realized how much he valued helping others until now. The quiet strength that Lorani had shown had touched something deep inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held for either of them, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. "Let's finish this," Ethan said, motioning to the ship. "You'll be flying again in no time." Lorani smiled back, a look of determination in her eyes. "I believe you." As they worked side by side, there was a new sense of teamwork between them. Every part that came together brought a sense of accomplishment. With each moment, the quiet tension between them lessened, replaced with an understanding and respect that neither had expected. Hours passed, and the ship was finally coming together. The final touches were being made, the last connections being checked. The hum of the engines had started to sound stronger, more confident. Ethan knew they were close, and yet, part of him didn't want to finish. There was something in the air between them now, something more than just friendship or the need to get the ship fixed. There was an unspoken connection, and as much as Ethan tried to focus on the task at hand, he couldn't ignore it. Lorani stood back for a moment, inspecting the ship. Her eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "You really did it, Ethan. It's amazing." He turned to face her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You helped too. It was a team effort." Lorani nodded. "I don't know if I could have done this alone." Ethan felt a strange sense of pride at her words. It wasn't just about fixing her ship anymore. It was about helping her find a new beginning, a new chance at life. But that feeling wasn't just one-sided. He could tell that she felt the same way. He had given her hope when she thought she had none. And in turn, she had shown him the value of selflessness, of helping someone without expecting anything in return. For a brief moment, they both just stood there, letting the silence settle between them. The sound of the ship's hum seemed to fill the space, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, almost like a promise. "I guess this is it," Lorani said quietly, looking back at the controls. Ethan glanced at her, then at the ship. "Yeah," he replied. "You'll be able to go home now." Lorani nodded, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. It wasn't fear or doubt, just a deep understanding that things wouldn't be the same once she left. The bond between them had formed in a way neither had expected, and neither was ready to let go of. Ethan stepped forward. "You don't have to go yet," he said softly. "We still have time, and I'd like to spend that time with you." Lorani's eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. But in that quiet exchange, they both understood what had just begun. And though their paths might be separate soon, something told them they would always carry a piece of this moment with them. The sun had set, casting a soft golden glow over the ship and the land around them. Ethan and Lorani stood side by side, gazing at the repaired ship. The quiet hum of the engines filled the air, now a steady, reassuring sound. The job was done, and yet there was something more that neither of them could ignore. For the past few days, they had worked together, fixing the ship and learning about each other. Ethan had grown used to her presence, to the way she spoke with such quiet strength and intelligence. He admired her resilience, her drive to survive in a galaxy that had given her so little. But as much as they had helped each other, there was a sense of finality in the air now. The ship was ready to fly, and that meant Lorani would leave. Ethan's heart tightened at the thought. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he first agreed to help her, but it hadn't been this. He hadn't planned on forming a bond with her. He hadn't planned on feeling this way, on wanting to keep her here, on wanting to be a part of her journey, even if it meant saying goodbye to everything he knew. Lorani stood a few steps away from him, staring at the ship with a mixture of relief and sadness. The quiet expression on her face made Ethan wonder what was going through her mind. Was she as conflicted as he was? "Are you ready to go?" he asked softly, his voice breaking the silence between them. Lorani turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the weight of the question. For a moment, She didn't say anything. Her gaze flickered to the ship and then back to Ethan. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Part of me feels like I should leave. I have to go back to my people, to try and rebuild. But another part of me doesn't want to leave." Ethan nodded, understanding her more than she knew. He had never been in a situation like hers, but he knew what it was like to feel torn between two worlds, two choices. "I get it," he said. "But you've been through so much already. You deserve to find peace, to find what makes you happy." Lorani's eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him. "I never thought I would find peace again," she said. "I never thought I would find someone who would care enough to help me. But then you came along." Her words touched Ethan more than he expected. He had only done what seemed right to him, what any decent person would have done. But hearing her say that she had found something in him, something she thought she had lost, made him feel both proud and humbled. He had done more than fix her ship. He had given her a chance at a new life, a chance to move forward. And in the process, he had found something in her too. "You've taught me more than you know," Lorani continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've taught me that there's still hope, that not all humans are like the ones who destroyed my world." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. There were no words to express the gratitude he felt, the deep connection that had formed between them in such a short amount of time. "I'm glad I could help," he finally said, his voice steady. "But you're not alone anymore, Lorani. You have me." She smiled, and it was a smile that filled Ethan's chest with warmth. It was the kind of smile that made him feel like everything he had done, everything he had given, had been worth it. "I know," she said softly, "and I can't thank you enough for that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world around them had quieted, leaving only the two of them standing there on the edge of a decision. The ship, now ready to fly, seemed to stand as a symbol of their crossroads. Ethan took a deep breath. "You don't have to go," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "I mean, I don't want you to feel like you have to leave. There's still time. You don't have to do this alone." Lorani looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, she reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "You're asking me to stay?" she asked quietly. Ethan's heart raced. He hadn't realized how much he had been hoping she would say yes. "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "Stay. Help me figure out what comes next. We could rebuild together. I don't want you to feel like you have to face the universe alone." Lorani's eyes searched his face for a long time, as if weighing the decision. Then, slowly, a soft smile curved on her lips. "Maybe. Maybe I don't want to be alone either." The words hung in the air between them, as if sealing a promise. Lorani had faced the destruction of everything she had known, and now, standing in front of him, she was making a choice to stay, to build a future. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in his own journey. With one last glance at the ship, Lorani turned back to Ethan. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice full of quiet determination. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Then let's do this together." And for the first time, they both felt like the future wasn't so uncertain anymore. The next morning, the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing the landscape in a soft, golden light. The air was crisp, the gentle breeze carrying a sense of calm after the tension of the previous days. Ethan stood outside the ship, looking out over the horizon, as if waiting for something to happen, something to tell him that the decision he had made was the right one. Lorani walked up beside him, her eyes bright and determined. "I've never been this far from home before," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I'm not sure what the future holds, but I think I'm ready for whatever comes." Ethan turned to her, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm glad you're here. We'll figure it out together." They both stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their decisions hanging in the air. But it wasn't an uncomfortable weight. It was a shared understanding, a bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. Lorani glanced at the ship. "It's ready," she said. "Everything's in place. We can leave whenever you're ready." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the ship once more. There had been many repairs, many long hours spent fixing broken parts and making sure everything was in working order. But now, it was ready for a new beginning, for both of them. "I think we're ready too," Ethan said. "It's not just about fixing the ship anymore. It's about what we do next." Lorani gave him a small smile, her eyes glinting with a quiet excitement. "Then let's go. No more looking back." They climbed aboard the ship together, settling into the cockpit. Ethan took the pilot's seat, while Lorani sat beside him, watching as he prepared the controls. The ship powered up with a soft hum, its engines ready to take them wherever they wanted to go. Ethan felt a sense of calm wash over him as he navigated the ship's controls. He had flown many ships in his time, but this one felt different. It felt like a new start, like a chance to finally leave behind the past and move forward with someone who understood him, someone who was willing to take a risk and build something together. Lorani leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment, as if she were savoring the moment. When she opened her eyes again, there was a spark of determination in them. "Where do we go first?" she asked, her voice steady. Ethan glanced over at her, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Wherever we want," he replied. "The galaxy's big, but it's not so big that we can't make our own path." Lorani's gaze softened, her expression filled with a mix of gratitude and hope. "I never thought I'd be able to say that again. That I could have a future, that I could go anywhere I wanted." Ethan's smile grew wider. "You're not just saying it, you're living it." The ship lifted off the ground, its engines roaring to life as they ascended into the sky. For a moment, they both sat in silence, watching as the land below grew smaller and smaller. The world that had once seemed so vast and full of danger now seemed distant, as if it no longer had a hold on them. Lorani looked out the window, her eyes tracing the stars that began to appear as they left the planet's atmosphere. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. "I've never seen the stars like this before. Where I come from, the skies are always dark, always covered in clouds. But here," she took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling. "Here, it feels like anything is possible." Ethan watched her with a quiet smile, knowing that this was the beginning of something new, something they both needed. "It's just the start," he said. "We don't know what's ahead, but we've got each other, and that's all we need." They flew for hours, traveling through the vast emptiness of space, navigating their way to an unknown destination. The silence between them was comfortable, a peaceful understanding that neither of them had to explain. They didn't need words to know that they were both ready for this next chapter. After a while, Lorani broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "Ethan, what if we find a place where we can start fresh? Somewhere no one knows us, where we can make a life without the shadows of the past following us." Ethan glanced at her, his eyes softening. "I think that sounds perfect," he said. "We'll find a place where we can build something together. A place where we can be free to live without fear." The idea of a fresh start, of leaving everything behind and creating something new, was one that filled both of them with hope. They didn't know where they would end up, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were in control of their own future. As the stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities, they both knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before Ethan and Lorani, the endless stars twinkling like distant diamonds. They had been flying for hours, but neither of them seemed to care about the time. The silence between them was peaceful, not awkward, as they both focused on their new journey ahead. The ship hummed steadily, the only sound accompanying their quiet thoughts. Lorani was the first to speak. Her voice, soft but firm, broke the silence as she looked out the window at the stars. "Ethan, do you ever wonder what lies out there? Beyond the stars, beyond everything we know?" Ethan looked over at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think about it all the time," he said, his voice calm. "The galaxy is so big, and there's so much we haven't seen. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The mystery, the unknown. I'm ready to discover it all, with you." Lorani smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars outside. "Me too. I've spent so much of my life trapped in one place, in one story that wasn't mine. But now," her voice trailed off, and she turned her head toward him. "Now, it feels like I'm writing my own story. A story that's only just begun." Ethan gave her a warm smile. "And we're writing it together." The ship continued its smooth journey through space, its engines purring like a gentle cat. They had no specific destination in mind. Their plan was simple: explore, see the galaxy, and find a place to call their own. The world, no, the universe was their canvas. And they were the artists. The possibilities were endless. As they traveled, they encountered other ships, strange and unfamiliar, but they were nothing like the terrifying fleets they had seen before. This was a different part of space, a part where the unknown wasn't a threat, but a chance for discovery. They waved to other travelers, exchanging messages and stories in passing, each encounter adding a new layer to their journey. Lorani began to feel more at ease, her earlier fears fading as the days passed. The anxiety she once had about the future slowly disappeared, replaced by a growing sense of wonder and excitement. She had never known what it was like to be free, to make her own decisions, to choose her own path. But now, with Ethan by her side, she was learning what it meant to be truly free. One evening, as they watched a glowing nebula swirl outside their ship's window, Lorani turned to Ethan with a soft smile. "Do you ever think we'll find that perfect place?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the colorful lights of the nebula. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe we won't find it right away. Maybe it'll take a while. But I believe we will. And when we do, it'll be the place where we can truly start fresh. A place where we can be who we are without any past holding us back." Lorani nodded. She believed him. The past was behind them now, a distant memory that no longer had power over their lives. They had a future ahead of them, and it was theirs to shape, together. As the days passed, their bond deepened. They spent their time learning from each other, sharing stories, and discovering new things about the universe. Lorani's curiosity grew, and Ethan's knowledge expanded as he taught her about Earth, about the stars, and about everything they had yet to see. One day, after weeks of travel, they came across a small planet, its surface dotted with lush forests and crystal-clear lakes. It was a peaceful place, untouched by the chaos of war and conflict. The planet seemed to welcome them, offering them a place to rest, to take a breath and reflect on everything they had experienced so far. They landed the ship and stepped out onto the soft, green grass. The air was fresh and clean, the scent of flowers filling their lungs. Lorani took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had been through lift off her shoulders. This was the peace she had been searching for, the quiet that had eluded her for so long. "This place," Lorani said, her voice full of wonder. "It feels like home." Ethan looked around, a content smile spreading across his face. "Maybe it is." They spent the next few days exploring the planet, enjoying the simple beauty of it all. For the first time in a long time, they felt truly at peace, as if the world had finally given them a chance to heal, to grow, and to become the people they were meant to be. Sitting together by a quiet lake one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky with brilliant hues of orange and pink, Lorani turned to Ethan with a soft smile. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said. "A place where I could finally be free. A place where we could be free." Ethan took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "I told you, we'd find it together. And we did." The stars above them shimmered brightly, and for the first time, both of them felt truly at home. They didn't need to search anymore. They had found their place, their peace, and their future. The journey had only just begun, and together, they were ready to face whatever came next.